Hi everyone! For this week's online lecture, we're going to talk about emotional development and the development of self. And we're going to talk about how that's kind of related to attachment. Okay, so emotional development is interestingly related to attachment patterns. And so remember when we talked about in class how there were 4 different types of attachment. There's secure attachment, or there are 2 different types of insecure attachment, or there's disorganized. Um, Remember that insecurely attached infants could be considered either resistant or avoidant. Well, those types of children are more likely to be just in general more fearful, and they're more likely to respond with distress to events that would typically be happy for securely attached infants or children. And so think about maybe the scenario of a birthday party. A 5-year-old at a birthday party is usually a pretty happy kid. Even if they get overwhelmed and they cry a little bit, for the most part, they're pleased to get the presents or the cake or the games or whatever is involved in the birthday party. However, when a child is insecurely attached, as measured in infancy, their response to happy events or emotionally salient events is usually just distress and fear. So that's kind of a negative outcome in terms of emotional development that manifests from being insecurely attached. Another thing that's important to know about emotional development is the idea about how other people around you help with the development of your emotions. So we adults really have an impact on how kids' emotional development develops. And one term that's important to understand regarding this is the idea of social referencing. So social referencing is just looking at the face of your parent or a caregiver when something happens so that you know how to react. And so in this photo, it appears that baby is going to the doctor and she might be a little bit afraid of the doctor. So she's looking at mom thinking, okay, well, what's mom thinking? Is mom feeling like this person is safe? And mom, you can sort of see, is smiling and making eye contact with the doctor. So baby can know indeed that the doctor is a safe person. Social referencing can be displayed as early as 6 months of age. So babies are pretty young when they start to have this ability, and it continues through most of childhood. One example is their friendliness to or wariness of strangers, which is sort of what's depicted in this photo. Another example is when a child falls down and gets hurt. Maybe you have seen a child, your own child, or one that is in your care, and sometimes you see them and they fall down and maybe scrape their knee lightly. And it's kind of, they could go either way. You know, it's not major, but the whole scenario could go one way or another. And so they might look over at you and your face might look mouth open, eyes wide. You gasp, you say something like, oh no. And in that case, the child does what? Breaks down into tears and cries, cries, cries. Another way that you could react is, oh, well, it's okay, just brush it off, you're fine. It's not a big scrape, you know, we could wash it off a little bit with a Band-Aid, and there it is. And then usually the child doesn't cry. Usually they kind of regulate their emotions. And so they're able to regulate their emotions through this social referencing. They're determining the severity of the situation based on the trusted adult's response to the situation. So it's a really important piece for emotional development. So another thing that develops that we've kind of been talking about throughout the quarter is the idea of emotion regulation. And all emotion regulation is just being able to control emotions and not letting them sort of take over. So it might manifest itself looking like staying calm in the face of frustration. So think about like a 2-year-old and how if a 2-year-old is, say, or a 3-year-old is like doing a puzzle, and a 2 or 3-year-old's doing a puzzle and he or she can't get the piece in, it might cause a total and complete meltdown. They might have a full-on meltdown, crying, screaming, throwing a fit, la da da da. And say a 4 or a 5-year-old encounters the same scenario, and they might be able to say, ah, well, I can take a deep breath, I can work it out, I can try harder, I can think, I might, you know, use some frustrated language, but they've sort of mastered, or at least they're starting to understand, the more socially acceptable response for experiencing frustration. And they've learned it from seeing adults model this, but it's also tied closely to brain development. So the parts of the brain that are responsible for controlling emotions are developing around ages 4 and 5. And so that's why kids are able to regulate their emotions a little bit more as they grow. And another way that this is tied to attachment pattern is that secure attachment really leads to better emotion regulation. So those kids who are securely attached have an easier time regulating their emotions. And it's not a surprise considering that securely attached infants are securely attached because their parents were tending to their needs. So when they cried, they got a response from their parents. So they knew that the parent was there to soothe their tears. That helped aid in their emotional development and it helped build their emotion regulation. Okay, so let's talk about the self. So one term that's important to understand in terms of the self is self-concept. And self-concept is just understanding that we are separate and distinct from the outside world and from other people. And so maybe if you like Ritz crackers, that doesn't mean that all your friends also like Ritz crackers. Maybe they like Triscuit crackers or Wheat Thins. One way we measure the development of self or self-concept is through something called the Rouge test. The Rouge test is just a test where infants are, or a grown-up rather, kind of sneakily puts a little bit of rouge or makeup on the child's forehead or nose, and then they either place them in front of a mirror or they strategically place a mirror in proximity to the child so the child's attracted to it and crawls over to it. And what they look for is if the child touches his or her own face, so not the face in the mirror, but physically touches their own face, thus recognizing that the rouge is on their face. And so that's sort of a marker that they have developed self-concept. And so we think that infants around 18 months will recognize this rouge on their nose when they're looking at themselves in the mirror. So we know that around 18 months, kids start to develop their sense of self-concept. By about 2 years, self-concept develops even more, and kids are able to use I or use their own name when they identify themselves in a photo. So I remember when Flora was about 2 years old, my niece, I got my first smartphone. And it was pretty cool, and I was taking all these videos and photos of her, and she would say things like, well, there's the baby, or where's the baby? Oh, there she is. And then she would start to say, well, that's me, well, that's Flora. I'm the one in there. That's the baby, is me. And so she was really starting to develop something deeper of a self-concept. It was really starting to grow, and it was very visible to us. Okay, so once kids start to become self-aware, it can really impact their emotional development. So understanding something about the self can help foster sharing behaviors and cooperation. So thinking that you exist and other people exist, you can start to develop things like, oh, well, I like these Ritz crackers. Maybe other people want them too. I might give them to my friends. They might like some Ritz crackers as well. However, it can also lead to the development of self-conscious emotions. So this can lead to embarrassment and envy and empathy, things like pride, guilt, and shame. Empathy, leaving empathy aside, some of these are more negative emotions. So it's really important for us as caregivers and teachers to think about when we're interacting with children who are starting to develop their self-concept, that these new feelings of guilt and shame are very tender and very new and salient to young children. So it's important that our interactions with children are sensitive, that we're keeping in mind that they're starting to feel guilt and shame for the very first time, and we want to be sensitive and aware of that. Okay, I want us to discuss the idea of self-concept further. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to discuss in small groups. So basically, we're going to pretend like we're in the classroom and I say, okay, everybody, now talk with the folks at your tables about some questions that I have for you. But since we're not meeting face-to-face, we're going to do that small group activity online. So let me show you how you're going to do that. So this is the home page of the Canvas site, and you're going to go into People. And then under People, you see everybody's names, and you're going to go into Groups. And in Groups, you'll see that I've created small discussion groups. And I'm going to need to leave student view to be able to show you this. Okay, so you're only going to see the group that you are assigned to. So this is week 10 participation, group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, group 6. And whatever group you're in, you'll just see that group. So let's say I'm in group 1. here are my group mates. I'm going to go ahead and enter group 1. And in group 1, look at that, you've got a discussion. So if you click on discussion, boom, there is a discussion about self-concept. I'm going to click on it and see what's in here. So what you see now is that you're in your week 10 participation group 1 in the discussions, and it looks just like a regular discussion that we do with the whole class. But this one is just with your small group, so only your group members can read your responses. And so what you're going to do here is, I've given you a link, these links are the same, a link to an article about self-concept that also has a little video in it. And I want you to watch the video and answer some questions in a discussion post, and then reply to other people's posts and have a conversation about it. And you don't have a limit on how many responses you can do. You can go on, and it's okay if you go off topic a little bit too. All right, that is what we're doing for this week. Have fun, and I look forward to reading your discussions.